Good evening, dear students. Hi, how are you doing? Welcome to the session tonight. Tonight is going to be very important, taking into account that we are going to deal with very essential topics in the context of this technical English workshop. Welcome once more. And today we're dealing with actions. Actions are ideas which are essentially expressed by verbs. So verbs will constitute the most important topic tonight, okay? So verbs. We need to remember that verbs are going to be modified by some complements and objects. They will attach and give certain characteristics and circumstances, and those are going to be very important for us to know and for us to take into account. Also, different conjugations will make part of the general functioning and the clear understanding that we can have in terms of verbs. So, verb tenses will constitute another important topic we will deal with today. Okay? So, verbs. Another conception that is not less important is the fact of the existence of regular and irregular verbs. So this conception will be revised and checked today too. So, welcome to the session once more. When talking about verbs, we need to first establish a division between two main categories that verbs have. Verbs can be then regular, and they can also be irregular. Okay, but what determines the fact that one verb is regular or irregular? First of all, the way they construct and the way they will have the past participle and the past tense. That determines the fact that one verb is regular or irregular. I'm going to give you some examples. Regular verbs like look or work or study, or arrive, etc., and many other ones, by the way. Regular verbs will constitute the majority of verbs. They are the big and the great majority of action terms. Look, work, study, and arrive. For us to make and for us to determine the formation of the past and the past participle, what we will have to do is making the addition of ed, and that's it. So you say looked, worked. Here a little modification has to be exerted, and we say studied. And here the only addition you have to make is a d, because of the fact that this contains e at the end of the corresponding word. The pronunciation of these terms is going to depend too on what we have at the end, if we have a voiceless sound or if we have a voiced sound, a voiced one, okay? So for example, looked. Over here the pronunciation is like a t, looked. Here, for example, the pronunciation is also t. So you say worked, looked, worked. Here, the pronunciation is voiced, so you say studied. You don't say studied. Although in some countries, depending on the accent people have in those nations and countries, some people are going to say studied, but regularly in English, that's not the standard pronunciation. The standard one is studied. Or, over here, the pronunciation is voiced too, and you say arrived. And in other cases, for example, the vowel sound usually existing in the adding, so in the addition that you have at the end of the corresponding term is pronounced. So you say here, for example, wanted. Here, according to what I have explained, this vowel sound is pronounced. So you say looked, worked, studied, arrived, and wanted. So these are regular verbs. On the contrary, irregular verbs don't have and don't follow a regular pattern as the other ones do, and they construct the corresponding past and past participle, as the name says or suggests, in an irregular form. So you say, for example, drive, and we can find that the past tense is drove, and the past participle is driven. Okay? You know that, okay? You have studied regular and irregular verbs. I'm just placing some examples. Another one, for example, is eat. Now, for you to make the past, or for you to get the past is ate, and the past participle is eaten. Remember, we can say eaten or we can say eaten, depending on the country the accent is taken from. Another one, for example, is drink. The corresponding past is drank, and the past participle is drunk. Well, these are essentially the factors and the features that distinguish one regular verb from one irregular verb. Now, what we will continue with is the existence of the different verb tenses in English. So, I will take this off. Well, now let's go to the verb tenses. The first one we'll take into account is simple present. Actually, for every verb tense that you take and studied, it's really important that you know the meaning and the use that it has. Every verb tense, students, dear students, is going to have a meaning and a corresponding use. And that is exactly what we need to master in terms of knowledge for you to be able to explain these conceptions in a clear form when you deal with students in different levels of education, at schools or universities, language centers, etc. Okay, so simple present. What is first? The main essence and the use and the meaning of the simple present tense. The fact that we refer to actions taking place all the time. Whenever we want to refer to an action taking place all the time, so we have to use simple present. We need to avoid confusions because many people usually have the very common trend to use simple present when you refer to actions taking place at this moment. Simple present tense is not for that. It is actually for actions taking place or occurring all the time. For example, usually I summarize the verbs by referring to hacer, which is do, which is the most common verb in English. I do, and this is present tense. But of course, we will say I study, or I work, or teach, dance, drive, etc. Whatever the verb is. Let's go to the meaning and the explanation of it. Look at this. This is the timeline, okay? This is now, this is future, and this is past. So time goes this way. Well, simple present tense is expressed and represented this way. This is an action taking place all the time. And I'm going to give you some examples. I live in Medellin. First, with this, we are referring to a temporal situation that takes place all the time. Of course, it can be modified, but for the time being, and the duration of this can be, for example, 1 year, 2 years, 6 years, 10 years, etc., whatever the amount of time is. And of course, this action taking place all the time has to be expressed in simple present. I live in Medellin, right? We also refer to routines when talking about the simple present. For example, she wakes up at 4:30 every day. usually, but not all the time, complementary information will be shown when expressing and referring to actions in simple present. For example, every day, I mean complements like this. For example, in this case, it refers to frequency, is going to indicate that the action takes place all the time, because actually every day refers to something taking place always. So she wakes up at 4:30 every day. This indicates routine. It happens, or it happened, today, it happened yesterday, and it will happen tomorrow. Of course, there can be changes, right? And there can be situations that will exert a difference in some moments, but essentially this takes place all the time, okay? I live in Medellin, she wakes up at 4:30 every day. Also, when talking about a simple present, we can also refer to universal facts, and I'm going to give you another example. The earth goes around the sun. Okay, look at this. The earth goes around the sun. When is this going to stop being like that? Actually, never. In terms of what we know about our human existence and about the universe too. The earth goes around the sun. So this is not only a routine, this is not only a temporary action, but this is a universal fact. The earth goes around the sun. Another one in that regard is water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. Actually, remember, we can say centigrade or Celsius too. Water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. This is also a universal fact. When is this going to stop being like that? Never, because it happens all the time. Okay, well, this is exactly and essentially what simple present tense is for. Okay, but now we will see a contrast. This explanation, by the way, is going to be a lot, okay, determined in terms of the contrast that we can make between one tense and another one. So you need to pay a lot of attention. Let's continue with present continuous. Remember, this can also be called present progressive. By having a contrast and by making a contrast, we will find that simple present with respect to present continuous, which refers to one action occurring all the time, this is going to show that the action doesn't take place all the time, but exactly the action is happening at the moment. I mean, when speaking. Yes, of course, when speaking. And I'm going to give you an example too. And the same illustration with the timeline. Well, this is now. And remember, this is future and this is past. Now look at this. Look at the difference. An action started in the past, and you, when referring to the action, you or whatever the person is here. And look at this. This doesn't indicate necessarily that the action will continue in an upcoming time in the future. It may or it may not. So when you say, for example, I'm studying math or mathematics, you don't necessarily indicate that the action will be finished. For the time being, and what is sure and clear for all of us is that you or the person, whatever the person is here, right? You began the action in the past, you're here, but you don't explain and refer to necessarily an action that is going to be continued. If you say, I'm studying math, you may continue or not. Maybe when saying this, you will continue with the action, or maybe an interruption will come and finally the action will be stopped. So I am studying math, you are here. So this is going to be expressed in terms of I am doing. I have used the contraction, which is really, really more common in English. I'm doing, but here we have I do. So look at the difference. Action, which is in the middle of being done. Is it clear? Well, that's fine. Let's continue with another topic, which is going to be the simple past and the past continuous, which is something similar, but this is going to be located, of course, in the past. Okay. It's, according to what I have said, really important that you deal with the conception of verb tenses. Simple past. Simple past. Okay. The action when talking about the past, now, future, and past. The action when being referred to in the past simply is related to an action done in a time which has no connection with our present moment. That is important for you to remember, okay? An action which is not connected at all with our present moment. An action which is considered started and also finished. Started and finished. No connection with this moment is exerted when using, for example, an action or when mentioning an action in past. So this is going to be expressed in terms of I did. Okay? So for example, we can have this. Last night, comma, I studied math. Right. Last night, I studied math. When you say I studied, which is summarized this way, I did, the action was begun or was started, but was also finished. The action was opened and closed. The frame, was opened and also closed. Last night, I studied math. Or, for example, we went to England 2 years ago. I want to do it better. We went to England 2 years ago. Here, for example, we can also find that the action of going, went, was completely in the past. 2 years ago means exactly 2014. And 2014 has no connection with now. So in this case, the action is in the past. Is it clear? That's fine. That's good, okay? You understand that clearly. Now, past continuous. Past continuous, let me tell you and let me put it in these terms. Past continuous is the same present continuous, but in the past. Great. Simply this way. So, another example, look at this. And this is important. It's the same conception that present continuous has, but located in the past. It is that at a certain time, let's say for example 2 years ago, or yesterday, or last night, or last week, etc. You were in the middle of doing something, and one more time, the only fact of saying I was doing doesn't say necessarily that the action was finished. Okay? So it might have been finished, or it might have not been finished. So, for example, look at this. Last night, comma, my sister, let me do it this way better, my sister was reading a magazine. Look, last night my sister was reading a magazine. This is the past continuous. My sister was here. Maybe an interruption could have taken place and the action was not finished, but maybe it was. So we don't say that and we don't report by just the expression and the utterance of the tense that the action was finished. Last night, my sister was reading a magazine. She might have finished or she might have not finished. Okay? Another example is this. This afternoon at 2 o'clock, I was talking to my boss. And look at this. Now I'm going to place an example that will show that an interruption can emerge and can, of course, break the development of the action. When suddenly the fire alarm rang. Look, this afternoon at 2 o'clock, I was talking to my boss when suddenly the fire alarm rang. The fact of having a fire alarm ringing, okay, constitutes an interruption in the action that was being done. We were in the middle of doing this. And finally, the action was not completed in that case. So, I was talking. This is past continuous. What is the contrast? In this case, essentially the action was started and finished. Over here, not necessarily. Okay, this is the contrast referring to or related to past simple and past continuous. We can say past simple or we can say simple past. That is not a problem. Okay, right. We will continue with other tenses. Okay, let's go ahead. Now, another really important one that you need to know in terms of the meaning and use is present perfect. Okay, present perfect. A tense which is really important too. And the way you can express it and summarize it is I have done. I'm going to have a chart. Summarize chart here. So we have I do, I am doing, I did, and I was doing. I think I didn't write it some minutes ago, but this is the summarized chart. I do, I am doing, I did, and I was doing. And now, this is the one studied. I have done. Present perfect. What is present perfect for? And what is the meaning it has? Look at this. This is now, as usual. And this is future, and this is past. Now, an action started in the past. Let's say, for example, in 2000, or let's establish. I'm going to use my personal example, and I'm going to establish a really smaller framework. At this moment is October, and I'm going to refer to September. And look at this. This action refers to something that started in the past, but it still has implications, repercussions, or a specific affection in the present moment. It actually comes to our time. Some people have the trend to confuse simple past and simple present. But essentially, what makes a distinction is that simple past has no connection with the present, while and whereas present perfect does have a connection with the present time. Okay? An action that started in the past but still has implications in the present. Example. I have lived in Medellin for a month. Okay, this. Now, let's remember that I had said when referring to past that the action has been, or had been, opened and closed too. But now, look at the difference. The action was open, but it hasn't been closed. Because according to what I have said, it comes into now. The action is valid now. So, that is what distinguishes one tense and the other one. I have lived in Medellin for a month means that you still live in the city. But if you say, I lived in Medellin for a month, look at this. Now the situation is quite different. In this case, what we find is that the person is not living in Medellin anymore. It means the person lived, the action was started, but the action was also closed. That is different. Can you see the contrast and can you see the difference? Of course you can, and we can. That is for sure. I'm going to give you another example. I have taught English for 20 years. Oh, teacher, really? Yes. Well, I have taught English for 20 years. So what does it mean? The action here started in 1996. And in the present time, you know for sure it is 2016. 1996, 2016, 20 years. The action started and was open, but it hasn't been closed. Why? Because the teacher is still in a process of teaching. I have taught English for 20 years. Remember, we can also refer to when the action started in terms of the use of another preposition, which is since. Oh, remember, okay? So you that have studied present perfect will know for sure about it. Since 1996. This is another way it can be expressed. And the meaning is the same for sure, right? But if you say, I taught English for 20 years, means for sure that the action was started, but the action was finished. In this case, the teacher is not carrying out his function anymore. In this case, he is. In this case, he isn't. Okay? That is for you to understand that main and clear contrast existing between the two verb tenses, which are present perfect and simple past. Okay, finally, in this first part of the session, we will refer to the difference existing between I have done and I have been doing. Actually, when talking about the amount of time that a person has done an action for, we can use this or we can use this. That's no problem. And this is our first example. We can say, I have taught English for 20 years. Or we can also say, I have been teaching English for 20 years. Let me write it better. Okay. Yes. I have taught English for 20 years, or I have been teaching English for 20 years. Right. That is for you to refer to the amount of time, the quantity of time the person has done an action for. But when referring to the amount of other things that don't have to do with time, let's say, for example, the quantity of courses, or let's say, for example, the quantity of students that you have had, the only possibility for it is the present perfect simple. This one, by the way, is present perfect, and this one is present perfect continuous or present perfect progressive. I'm going to include them in the summarized chart. I have done and I have been doing, right? Well, this is essentially the difference. I'm going to give you the other example. I have taught more than 100 courses. Look at this. Now, we are referring to the quantity, yes, as here, but the quantity referred to in this case is the quantity of courses. More than 100. Let me tell you that present perfect continuous in this regard is not good. It's not the best option. Actually, it is bad. It is incorrect. I have taught more than 100 courses, but we can say I have taught English for 20 years or I have been teaching English for 20 years. The last example in this regard is this one. I have been reading the Bible for 6 months. I have been reading the Bible for 6 months. Or we can also say, I have read the Bible for 6 months. But now let's refer to the quantity of books from the Bible that you have read. So you can only say, I have read, and not I have been reading. Only I have read 30 books of it. It, in this case for sure, will refer to the Bible. I have read 30 books of it. Clear? So this is for you to take it into account. One more time, present perfect is going to be for you to refer to the amount of things or sometimes the amount of time. And present perfect continuous will refer to the amount of time you have been doing an action for. Well, actually other conceptions related to place and related to time can be said when referring to sentences with present perfect continuous. We can say, I have been living in Medellin. I have been shopping in that supermarket. And also, of course, other conceptions will be included over there. But essentially, information about quantity of time is usually referred to in those sentences. Well, guys, this is the first part of our session tonight. Thank you so much for your attention, and let's continue in a moment.